All right, so once you've downloaded that package, you should see it as a zip file in your downloads. So just go ahead and unzip it. And you should see this folder called Flower Classification Model, and it should contain 3 files: deploy.prototext, flower-labels.txt, and oxford102.caffe model. This is all that we're going to need in order to create our .ml model for our flower classification model. So in order to convert this Caffe model into a CoreML readable model, we're going to need to create a script in Python. So don't worry, you don't need to know a lot of Python, and just follow along with me if you're completely new to the language. So in order to do that, we're first going to need a text editor or a code editor. So if you already have a code editor that you quite like, then just go ahead and use that. So something like Sublime or my favorite, Atom, will be a good fit for this job. But if you don't have a text editor, then I recommend you to just go to atom.io and download Atom for free. So once you open Atom, in the left navigation bar, you should see your desktop by default. Now, if you don't, you can also go to File, Add Project Folder, and select whichever folder it is that you are developing out of. So here, if you right-click on Desktop, you can create a new folder, and we're going to call it Flower Classification. And in here, we're going to create a new file, and that file is going to be called convert-script.py. Now, in order to load up those files that we downloaded and convert it using our convert script as well as CoreML tools, we're first going to need to put those 3 files that we downloaded into the same directory as our convert script. So that's the flower classification directory. So if we open up this flower classification directory, you can see at the moment it only contains convert-script.py, which we just created. And all we're going to do is just drag these 3 files that we've unzipped into this new folder called flower classification. So this way the convert script rests in the same directory as the model files. So now if we head back into Atom, you can see that now they all appear and they're at the same hierarchical level. So we can begin writing our Python script to convert our flower classification model. The first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need to import the CoreML tools library. So this is what we downloaded and installed in the last lesson. If you haven't done the last lesson, please go back because otherwise it won't work without it. So once we import CoreML tools, then we're going to be able to use some of the code and some of the methods that are inside that package. And if you have a look at the documentation for CoreML tools, then we can see what that method looks like. So I've linked to this file in this lesson, but you can also go there by just going to pythonhosted.org/CoreML tools. And you can see that it gives you a little bit of explainer what CoreML tools is and what it does and how to install it, although we've already done that. Now the part that we're interested in is the model conversion. And if you have a look in the left-hand side here, you can see that there's converters, models, and utilities. We're more concerned with the converters, and more specifically, the Caffe converter. So if you click on that, it'll take you to the converter that's going to help you convert Caffe models. And you can see that the method is using CoreML tools.converters.caffe.convert. And then you've got a whole bunch of parameters that it takes. Some are required and some are optional. So the parameters that we're going to be concerned with is firstly the model, which is a string which is going to be a string that describes the path to the particular model, so that the converter tool can navigate to the model that you want to convert. Now, the second parameter that we're going to be using is this one called class labels. And this is a string that describes the file path to a document where all the classes are named. So if you have a look in here, we've got this flower labels.txt, and if you open it, you can see that it's basically just a list of all the classes or all the names of the flowers. And the third thing that we're going to need is this image input names as a string or as an array of strings. And this is the name of the input blobs of the Caffe model. And for Caffe, usually by default, this is the string called data. So if we head back into Atom and we open deploy.prototext, you can see that you've got this key called input and its value is data. And this is by default true for most Caffe models, but if you're using a different Caffe model, just go in and check to see what that value actually is. So let's put it all together and let's create our conversion method. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called Caffe model, and this is going to be set to the file path of my Caffe model. And in this case, because all three of my model files are actually in the same directory as my convert script, then I only need to specify their names instead of specifying a path. So instead of something like // blah blah / blah blah / blah blah, all I need to do is just to write the name of where that model lies. And that model is called Oxford 102.Caffe model. And the other thing I need to specify is the deploy.prototext. And this is basically a file that describes the architecture of the Caffe model so that it can be understood. So we're going to specify a file path to that as well. And you can see it's called deploy.prototext. It's really important that that text is not fully spelled out. It's like the .text extension. So it's really important just to make sure that you don't have any typos here, because anything that is not the same as what you see on screen is going to cause you some problems down the line. So just double and triple check. Now the next variable I'm going to create is called labels. And this is going to refer to that flower labels file that contains all the names of the classes. So this is going to be called flower-labels.text. And again, it's txt rather than text. So just make sure you check that. And let's double check to make sure that these files are the same. Oxford102.caffe. Oh, there we go. We've already got a typo there. So Oxford102.caffe model and deploy.prototext. Geez, I make a lot of typos. And then it's flower-labels.text. So check your own file if you're coding along. It's really, really easy to make typos, especially when you don't have good old Xcode helping you and pointing out the errors. All right, so now that we've got these two variables, Caffe model and label, we're finally going to invoke that conversion method. And I'm going to store the outputs of the conversion in a variable called coreml_model. And this is going to be set to equal to coreml_tools.caffe.convert. And the parameters I'm going to use in here are the Caffe model that we created up here. Also the class labels. And finally, that last parameter, which is called image input names equals data. So that comes from here, remember? And these are the names of those parameters, which you can see in here. So we're using the model, we're using the image input names, and we're also using the class labels. All right, so just check to make sure that you don't have any typos like I did. But otherwise, once that conversion is done and the output of that conversion has been stored inside this variable, we're going to save that variable into a .ml_model file. So we're going to write coreml_model.save, and you can give it a name. So I'm going to call it flower classifier.mlmodel. Now the extension is really important. It has to be .mlmodel because this is the only format that's readable by CoreML. But the name of the ML model, you can call it anything you like. But make sure that you call it something descriptive and something that makes sense to other people. Or, you know, if you can't think of anything better, then just call it flower classifier.mlmodel. That way you'll be able to do exactly what I'm doing in the later lessons. All right, so once that's done and we've double and triple checked everything and everything looks good, then we're just going to hit save, and now we're going to run it in our terminal. So if I pull up the terminal, and remember I need to run that script inside a Python 2.7 virtual environment. Now if you remember the path, then it's pretty easy to just cd into it, but a slightly quicker and easier way sometimes is just by typing cd and then dragging the file directory that you want to navigate to into the terminal. And you can see that it outputs the entire file path. And if you hit enter, you're now inside environments. So inside here, we are going to activate our Python 2.7 environment. So remember it's source Python, what did we call it? Python 27/bin/activate. Hit enter. We are now running under Python 27. So the next thing I want to do is I want to head into this flower classification directory so that we can run our convert script.py. So to do that, I'm going to use that trick that I showed you earlier on rather than navigating around. So I'm just going to write CD and then drag that into there and then hit enter. And now I'm inside flower classification. So cool. So now I am at this level in my directory and I'm going to run the convert script.py. All right, so I'm just going to drag that out so that it doesn't wrap that line. And then in order to run that Python script, all I need to do is type Python convert script.py. And just double check to make sure that you spell everything correctly. Python convert script.py looks exactly the same. All right, hit enter. And now it might take a little while for it to do its job. So this is a good point to go and grab a cup of tea and come back and it should be done. Depending on the processing speed of your computer, this can take anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes. All right, so I've made myself a cup of tea. So if you hear any slurping sounds, don't be alarmed. So when in England, drink plenty of tea. Now, as you can see, this process has completed and you can tell because your prompt is back. So you can see my name and the $sign. So that's your prompt. Now, if you had any problems with the conversion, you'll probably get an error. It basically won't look the same as mine. So if you have an error, the most likely thing is that your script has a typo in it. Especially if your error says something like error on line 51, etc. So check back, compare your script against my script, or I've actually provided the script as a download in this lesson, so you can just simply download it and copy and paste it in. And that way you should be able to avoid any small typos that you might have encountered. All right, so once it's done, if you have a look inside your flower classification class, you should now be able to see your flower classifier.mlmodel. So this is what we're going to be using in the next lesson in order to bring all the capabilities of flower classification into our app. So I'll see you on the next lesson.